allow me to introduce Keith Marshall. Keith Marshall is that rarest of breeds. He's the CEO of a British company that's planning a massive major investment in Ecuador. Hopefully we'll see lots more of these over the next 10 years in the decade of mining that the minister talked about. Keith Marshall is the CEO of SolGold, which is currently working on developing Alpala, which will be one of the world's largest copper mines when it's finally built. Welcome, Keith.
Thank you very much, James.
Next up, we have Daniel Pino. Daniel Pino is the founding partner of Pino Elizalde Abogados. This is a corporate law firm based in Guayaquil. Daniel, it's a pleasure. I'm glad you could join us for today's panel.
A pleasure, James.
And finally, I'd like to introduce Carlos Sarmiento. Carlos Sarmiento is a managing director for Schlumberger for Ecuador, Peru, and Colombia. They are, of course, one of the world's biggest oil field services firms, but they're absolutely huge in Ecuador, where they've been investing billions of dollars in boosting the country's oil production. Welcome, Carlos.
Thank you, James, and a pleasure to be here with sharing this panel with Keith and Daniel.
Look, I'm just going to start off with a really quick, simple question. We've heard a lot from different representatives of governments, and the messaging has been very, very positive. I just want to ask you, for example, Keith, as an international investor looking at developing a project in Ecuador, how significant is Lasso's victory? This change in tone, this change of message, how important is it for international investors like SolGold?
The change is enormous. I always look at it and say, whichever regime you end up working with, and whichever country the deposits are located in, those are the governments that we need to work with, and we have to develop the relationships with the host governments. But what's happened for SolGold, and I think what's happened for Ecuador, certainly over the last 4 or 5 months, is that we've just seen what I call a change in the wind direction. We seem to be trying to the wind seemed to be blowing into our faces for a long time, and then as 2021 came along, there's been significant change in the copper price. There's been significant political change in Ecuador, and there's as the ambassador coined at the beginning of the program today, he used the phrase "greening with responsible mining," and I felt that encapsulated the situation that SolGold finds itself in Ecuador. So, in summary, we think it's a great and positive change. I was very interested to listen to the 2 ministers. They filled me with great enthusiasm for getting out to Ecuador and making Alpala a reality.
So thanks, Keith. And really the same question to Carlos, and it's got a slightly different perspective because obviously, Carlos, you already have such a large footprint in the country. So, I mean, have you noticed any changes yet at the oil well level, or is it too soon for that?
Thank you, James. No, I can only echo Keith. What we are seeing in front of us is the wind blowing in the right direction, and I think it's up to us to contribute to what the President Lasso and the government is trying to achieve, because it's a great opportunity for the country, and it's a great opportunity for whoever is or want to be in the country.
There's really, in a sense, I think there's 2 themes that we can explore in this panel, and putting it in very simple terms. The ministers and the government have laid out these ambitious aims. So when it comes to mining, it's a decade of mining. When it comes to oil and gas, they want to double oil and gas production. And then you start to think, well, look, they're great aims, but what are the barriers to achieving that? And clearly the environment is one of them. How do you double oil and gas production and protect the environment? Likewise with mining. And then also you've got the legal and regulatory barriers. So they're the 2 themes that I want us to discuss today. So firstly, I'm just going to ask Daniel Pino, is the existing, we've heard today that it won't be easy for Lasso to pass lots of reforms through Congress. Is the existing legislation sufficient for Ecuador to attract the billions of dollars and all the private companies is going to need to achieve these aims? As a lawyer, do you think he's got everything in place, or does he need to make new laws?
Well, James, in Ecuador, we have to understand that we have first two sets of regulations, I would say. Our legal structure is ruled paramountly by the Constitution, and the Constitution in place dates back from a regime that had a more leftist approach of the economy. However, this Constitution has the possibility and allows for the possibility of the participation of the private sector, quote, exceptionally. This exception it has been understood by some as a limitation for an aggressive and active plan for Lasso, for President Lasso, as he has envisioned. I tend to disagree with that, because that the origin of that belief is based on all concepts of what sovereignty, the concept of sovereignty is understood. Sovereignty is not to protect a country for itself, but to is a more modern way to understand the sovereignty. You see that what is the role of the state? The role of the state is to foster and to promote the welfare of the people and the well-being for the people, and that has been proven in the same or under the same constitution with other laws that have been recently enacted, such as the public-private initiative laws that grasp these modern concepts of private participation on the economy. Definitely, it would be more convenient to have constitutional provisions stronger or in strong support of the private participation of the economy in the overall economy, but which the provisions of what that we still have are strong enough. Then, aside from the Constitution, we also have to see that each sector has specific regulations. And we have to understand also that Ecuador's potential historically has been based on oil. And because of that, we do have in the oil sector more regulation, more developed regulation. We do have for example, the participation agreements in place, which were the agreements that were in place 15 years ago before they were changed to service contracts. So they are there. The fact that the plan that Minister Bermeo just laid out and is is based on a decree issued last week by President Lasso is a strong and very positive first step towards creating an overall policy toward in favor of the oil sector. But we do need something similar for the mining sector, as Keith has been discussing. We do need President Lasso and his team to lay out a similar plan for the mining sector, which has been less of less interest of the state in the history because of its lesser importance in the economy. And finally, I would not. I think that we do also need a plan and a policy for another sector that of destructive industries that has also been neglected, which is the gas sector. The gas sector, they are kind of, if you see the economy, the geography of Ecuador, the oil sector is traditionally in the Amazon region. In the highlands, we find the mining activities, and then gas has been located in the Gulf coastal region. So there is only one field in production, Amistad, which dates back from the early 90s. But a policy could promote activities there, and significantly, because those fields are neighboring to the northern part of Peru that has also huge gas fields there. Actually, Peru provides us with necessary gas for the industries that rely on that product for the southern part of Ecuador. So a policy and a new set of laws to promote specifically gas activities is also something that I think should be considered in the plans of the government. Now that we have the attention of all the world, I would say, on what is to happen for Ecuador.
Excellent. Thank you, Daniel. I mean, Carlos, in a sense, I shouldn't ask you if you think that the existing oil and gas regulation should be changed, because you're already operating very successfully in the country and you've already found a way to work with the existing state of play. So instead, I want to ask you about the environment. Well, there's so many questions popping up on my screen right now talking about the environment. And what they're basically saying is, how can Ecuador double oil and gas production and also be a leader in the energy transition and also protect the environment? But people are kind of pointing this out as a contradiction. On one hand, the government is talking about doubling oil and gas production. On the other hand, it's going to send Guillermo Lasso to COP26. So I want to ask you, Carlos, because Schlumberger is going to be directly involved in that. How can Ecuador double oil and gas production and clean its emissions profile and produce clean oil and basically not harm the environment?
Thank you, James. I noticed you asked the same question to the minister, and he answered with the word challenge. And yes, it is a dual challenge, and it's not unique to Ecuador. It's a challenge that the world is facing, because we want to reduce the emissions, and at the same time, the world is going to experience some growth that is going to come with an adhering need for energy, right? So under that context, and I think the UN SDGs are quite clear, and I think that could be a good baseline to follow. Another very important point is that, and actually the government have taken some steps, even with the change of the name of the Ministry of Environment, that now includes the need for the ecological transition. And that's what we need to look at, sustainability. I think, we need to be more demanding on the way we operate. Right now, there are already technologies that can definitely reduce the emissions in the operations. There are technologies and processes that can look into the other emissions that are generated in the whole process, in the whole value chain, and try to do something about it. Concepts like flaring, like methane fugitive emissions, those needs to be taken into account. So a roadmap needs to be created on the name of the ecological transition that the Ministry of Environment has already set up. So it is possible. It is a dual challenge. The reserves are there. So technologically, we can get to the 1 million barrels. We need to protect the environment. We need to protect the communities. So it is a matter of all the players consciously sitting together and building this roadmap. And just to give you an example, we are already doing something in our fields. We are using a lot of digital to create the transparency of what we do, and looking very carefully on the emissions that are being generated. We have created a portfolio of what we call transition technologies that are focused on reducing the emissions compared to existing technologies. and that overall are creating a positive impact. So all of these need to be played, but it starts with assuming that we play a role, that we have our role to play on this dual challenge, and that we need to seriously set targets towards this roadmap, and be permanently working on it. You know, not only the emissions that you directly generate, but also the emissions that you indirectly generate through your products that are, or services in the longer spectrum of the value chain. That's, you know, what we call a stage 1 and stage 2 and stage 3. So that will be my answer.
And Carlos, I mean, would you welcome then, when you talk about the efforts that Schlumberger is already taking, and that perhaps not all of the companies in the Ecuadorian oil sector are employing the same technology or the same rigorous standards, would you welcome then, if this new government manages to attract new international entrants that are bringing best practices to Ecuador, would you welcome that? I mean, basically, is that more competition, or do you want to see more international players coming to Ecuador?
No, absolutely. We need, as long as we are aligned with what I just said, you know, the understanding of the dual challenge, the need of transparency, the look into sustainability from all aspects, adherence to the UN SDGs, that competition is absolutely welcome. You know, but we really need to make a serious effort on taking strong steps towards doing it right.
I'm just going to switch to Keith now, because mining's in this funny position where, you know, if you ask most people in Ecuador, indeed, if you ask most people in London, they are all in favor of electric vehicles. They're all in favor of renewable energy. And then if you ask them, great, can I build a copper mine next to your house? They probably wouldn't be so happy about it. So mining's in this strange situation where it's seen as part of the solution to the energy transition, but mining projects, especially in Latin America, especially in Ecuador, are facing lots of opposition. So Keith, I just want to ask you, how, I mean, what you're building with Alpala is huge, and you've also got these other targets. I mean, in 20 years' time, SolGold could have built some absolutely ginormous mines in Ecuador. How are you going to manage this type of environmental or political opposition to these massive projects?
Well, thanks, James. You're right about everyone liking electric cars and nobody liking mining in their back garden. I always liken it to, I did some tin mining in Cornwall, and we have a character in Cornwall called Poldark, a very romantic character, and he made mining very popular in Cornwall, and it's got a great history. So I always say that places around the world need to develop a Poldark approach. But what we have to do with the mining sector is we have to bring to bear all of the experiences that we've gained operating around the world in environmentally responsible areas. I spent 4 years operating in Alaska in what was known as a wilderness area, which was the highest level of national park in the United States. And we had monitoring, basically instantaneous monitoring of the water quality and air quality around the mine. So we bring all of those environmental steps into controlling the emissions from the mining activities. Most of the mines, all the mines that I've worked at, have basically a zero emissions from a water point of view. So all of the water that falls onto the mine site, all of the water that's that is encountered during the mining activity is held within a water reservoir of the mining operation. And then if any water is needed to be released, it has to go through a water treatment plant. So it's basically taken back to drinking water standards. And those are the levels that we have to operate to these days. And there's nothing unusual in that. The mining companies are doing it around the world because the communications are such these days that if you don't operate to the highest standards, the world knows about it very, very quickly.
Excellent. Thank you, Keith. There was a slight pause there as I was reading through these questions, and I've realized that we're getting similar questions for oil and gas and for mining, but I'm now going to proceed to put them to Keith and Carlos. These questions are basically about the state oil company, Petroecuador, and they're about Enami, the state miner. So first of all, Carlos, to you. It was interesting earlier in the presentation, we heard earlier in the event, we heard people comparing Ecuador to Argentina and the similarities between Guillermo Lasso and Mauricio Macri. But when it comes to oil and gas, the real comparison is Colombia. Because obviously Colombia, I think from about 2004, 2005, doubled its oil and gas production from about 500,000 barrels a day to 1 million barrels a day, and basically did exactly what Lasso wants to do now. Now, Colombia did that in large part thanks to Ecopetrol, which is one of the best national oil companies in Latin America. And it is, of course, partly listed on the stock market. So I want to ask you, Carlos, what does Ecuador need to do with Petroecuador? Do we need to have some of it listed in New York? Does it need to be privatized? What do they have to do for Petroecuador to have a similar role to Ecopetrol?
Thank you, James. First of all, a clarification. Yes, Ecopetrol was a good part of the big achievement that Colombia had regarding production increase. But another big part was, the whole change in the policy that the government of Álvaro Uribe applied with the creation of the National Hydrocarbons Agency that got the ownership of the resources and was in a way a focal point towards the community handling, understanding the potential of the reservoirs and all of that, and creating all the scenario for with the access to data and transparency on the access to data and easiness on the access to data for investors to come. And then Ecopetrol played a role on the sense that by becoming something very similar to a private company with their own governance and their own budget and their own handling of their finances, they were competing at the same level with the other companies that came to Colombia. So all of that was, in a sense, what helped Colombia to reach the target of doubling their production in a period. For them, I think it took them between 6 to 7 years to reach the 1 million barrels per day. So. But then the question about Petroecuador, absolutely, and I agree fully with what the minister said. We need a better company that is modernized in a way, with the right governance and the right leadership and the right level of ambition based on their current capabilities, that will allow them to compete in a similar way with other companies. On the benefit of the country, to maximize the productions and to maximize the existing fields. So yes, and I think the decree is already, the decree number 95 that came across last week is already pointing on that direction, and that will be a very nice step. It's not only Ecopetrol who have done it. Petrobras did it in Brazil as well, and both of them proved very successful.
Excellent, thank you, Carlos. Keith, I know as an international investor, you're going to be loath to get involved in Ecuadorian politics, but I'm going to ask you anyway. And I'll ask you this because you've developed and built mines in lots of different jurisdictions, from Argentina to Mongolia to the US. So you've seen this before. What do you think needs to be done with Enami?
James, very good question. Obviously, from a mining point of view, mining company point of view, we welcome any responsible government agency. My only caveat to that would be to say that it needs to simplify the playing field that we're dealing with when we're dealing with the government, and not complicate things. For example, as the mining company, and we wanting to develop a mine, we're dealing fairly heavily with Department of the Environment. We're dealing pretty heavily with the Department of Mining. So we've got with the Department of Finance. So we have various discussion points with the government. We're following a path that Fruta del Norte and Lundin have already been down. So we know the procedure, but there are a lot of permits that we need to get. There's a lot of agreements that need to be held with the Department of Finance on the investment agreement and all those sort of things. So if Umami are going to be holding our hand as we're talking to the government agencies, that we would welcome that. But what I wouldn't want to see is a situation where we had another level of bureaucracy introduced, especially in a jurisdiction or a department. We would hope that the department would be manned with experienced mining people, so that they would be able to be educating the people of Ecuador and working with us, rather than, let's say, being another level of bureaucracy, which could be potentially quite challenging.
Just some quick questions as I get them before we continue with this discussion. Keith, someone's just asked me, well, he's called John Gilchrist, when does SolGold expect to enter production?
That's a very, very good question. Currently, we're working on the pre-feasibility study. We take that into a definitive study next year. And we would hope to be getting production from the underground somewhere around 2028, 2029, which sounds an awful long way away. But you have to remember, with a deposit like ours and the mining method that we're going to use, which is block caving, number one, you've got to get to the bottom of the deposit, and it's 1.3 kilometers deep. So we've got to go 1.3 kilometers down, which will take us about 3 years to access. And then we've got to develop around about 100 kilometers of tunnels underneath the ore body. And that's another couple of years of development. So we've got 5-6 years of development ahead of us before we get anything out of the cave.
Daniel, a couple of questions for you. So I'm going to adapt these questions slightly, but Fernando raises a good point. He says that the previous government, I mean, we talk about being a transition from left wing to right or centre right, but Lenin Moreno was obviously a transition government and was already making some positive steps. So, for example, Fernando notes that Ecuador already has a national mining policy, 2019 to 2030, and a national strategic mining development plan. And I guess the basic question here is, will the new government try and build on some of the good initiatives of the previous government? Will it, because the previous Ministry for Energy and Non-Renewable Natural Resources spent a long time coming up with these plans that for political reasons they were never able to implement. But will this new government try and salvage some of that and try and build on some of these plans, or will it start from scratch?
No, definitely, James. Whatever good experiences were achieved by the past governments would certainly need to be accounted by this new one. Starting from scratch and neglecting what has been done would just for purely political reasons wouldn't make sense. I see that from the past there was a lot, and Ecuador has focused most directly and strongly towards large-scale mining. That evidently because it provides fresh and larger resources for the state. But the mining sector is much more complex and not only can bring a lot of resources to Ecuador and a lot of but much needed jobs if we only focus on large scale mining. There is a lot to be done in small scale and medium scale mining that can help that plan. And definitely all the efforts of the former administration, which has which I agree was a transition regime, could be help in that. I would add that part of the efforts that Ecuador needs to consider in reaching those policies and reaching those ambitious plans that we all want Ecuador to achieve are not only to be focused or discussed within Ecuador or fought, quote, I would say, within Ecuador. Ecuador has a huge challenge. The minister used correctly that expression, and Carlos too, has a huge challenge, not only internally, but has a huge challenge abroad. Ecuador has been slowly losing access to finance in from foreign financial institutions, especially a European, for environmental matters, for social related matters. And Ecuador has never had a policy towards that huge problem, which could prove very problematic in reaching these goals, because all the goals that we are talking about require a lot of investment, a lot of money. There could be initiatives, individual initiatives, like Keith mentions in SolGold or Carlos in Schlumberger. But Ecuador needs a policy of its own as a country to set up the rules and address the concerns valid that ONGs may have and may pursue and push against those foreign banks to tell them, look, no, what we're doing here is according to best industry standards, best industry practices, and invite them here to come and see the financial institutions on their own, on the ground, to see what we're doing here. And that will help release those necessary funds. A plan can look very nice in paper, but but we need the money to make it happen, and the money not only for large, big companies that we evidently want, but also for smaller and medium-scale operations, and those are the ones who need the money the most. So the Lasso's plan in Decree 95 is as a great first step towards that, towards understanding the policy on the oil sector. But we need a more comprehensive plan that is also in the works, as the minister has explained, that has to cover mining, has to cover gas, has to cover renewable sources also, but in general has to cover the access to that finance, and that is key. My other last comment in the challenge is that when we discuss, and you asked Carlos about the integration, this merger of Petroecuador and Petroamazonas in one oil production company, we need to understand how the oil sector is structured in Ecuador. Ecuador not only participates in the upstream, in the medium stream, but also Ecuador participates all the way up to the international transportation of its own crude. So we need to devise a policy in which Ecuador obtains the proper, I would say proper and just, not the best share, because the best share may not be the right concept, the proper share in the overall activity, not only in oil, but the same in gas, but the same in mining. But in this particular case, in the case of oil, that considers all these elements. You could make a huge business upstream, bringing the oil from the ground, but you lose it while you transport it, or you lose it while you refine it without the proper conditions. Or even you can lose it when you transport it internationally. You can say a tender was won on your right hand, but all the benefits are lost or diminished in your left hand when you do not participate properly in that refining / transportation or other part of the business. So the need of an integral policy is what I think is what I see as the best step in the Lasso's plan. This is something we have not heard in more than 25 years in Ecuador, a new policy for the sector. And I'm only hoping to see that same national policy on the mining sector and the same national policy on the gas sector and evidently in the electricity. But I think that this is a great first step for the government that should be followed by others. But there is an integral approach on finance. That was what I wanted to comment, James.
No, excellent. Thank you, Danielle. And look, I'm going to take this opportunity to, we've got a couple of important updates. First, we're meant to be finishing at 5:45 UK time, but we've still got, 150 investors online. So if that's okay with the panelists, I think we can run on for a couple more minutes and carry on this discussion. Secondly, we've just been contacted by Minister Bermeo's team, and they have said that they are happy to share the presentation. So I'm going to leave it to Canning House's IT team to arrange how we'll do that. But there's been lots of people in the chats asking for the presentation, and I can now confirm we have permission to share that. So you will be receiving that presentation, depending on how the IT guys make it happen. I think now I'd just like to move to Keith and Carlos because the challenges are so similar. And I just want to ask us some very specific improvements. Sometimes I get the feeling with this government that it's very ambitious, that it's very technically capable, and it's almost so ambitious that as an investor or as a journalist, you're left wondering, well, what are the next significant steps? So first, Carlos, just, intangible, practical steps, not some of the long, big vision we've been talking about, not talking about doubling oil and gas production, but just intangible, practical steps. What could Lasso's government do for Schlumberger and other companies in your sector to improve conditions over the next 2 years?
No, I think, it will be probably, I don't know if I am the right person to define specifically the roadmap, but what I can say is that the decree is already setting the context and is setting the challenge to all the players in the industry to take those elements of the decree and land it into concrete actions, right? And that's probably what you want to get. So let's take some of them. A big challenge is the fact that the environmental licenses have been waiting for quite some time to be approved, and I think this is even common to mining. And the government is taking very serious efforts to prioritize based on the impact these licenses are going to have and how easy are they going to be applied. Is even adding resources into the Ministry of Environment to be able to really speed up the process and debottleneck that particular thing.
Carlos, sorry to interject. I mean, I find that fascinating. So what you're saying is one of the early signs that we can see that this government is starting to have success is if more environmental permits are issued more quickly.
Yeah, I got to know that in the past 3 weeks, this ministry got the same number of licenses approved that in 1 year. So things are moving, right? So, but the problem is really big. So these signs could probably not be good enough, but things are moving. What can be done on that aspect? And I will take the decree that Minister Bermeo mentioned that about to make to reduce the tramitology and to reduce the bureaucracy in a way by making things more efficient. And that can apply definitely to the emission of environmental licenses. Things like that have already been applied in other countries where you digitalize the process, you assign accountability to the person that is going to execute the license. So those things can happen, right? If I take another one, the creation of this new participation contract model and the opportunity for all the players to voluntarily move into that contract model if the players consider that is going to be mutually beneficial. On that, if I take two actions, I think the main action that I will ask is flexibility, because probably not all of them are going to move at the same speed. And we should not jeopardize the opportunities for production increase that exist under the current contracts. So, those fine tunes and are opportunities to land into concrete actions that come from the context defined by the decree.
No, Carlos, that's excellent. Your point about the environmental licenses is excellent. And that stat that in the first month they did more than in the whole year of the previous minister says it all. Keith, while Carlos was speaking, somebody is typed away furiously and put in the mining sector, the best signal that they are making progress is if they open up the mining cadastre. Yes. Now, I'm going to say something, Keith. I don't want to put you in an awkward situation here. I am honoured and delighted that the minister took part in this panel. I think it's great. I thought that his presentation was full of data. It was very good. But still, we haven't had a clear answer from this government of when the Catastro Minero will be opened. And I just want to ask you, how significant is it when it remains shut? How negative is that when it comes to attracting fresh investment to Ecuador? And secondly, with your experience in other jurisdictions, why is it so complicated to reopen? If this is something that everyone is highlighted as a key factor for the industry, why is it taking them so long to even give us a date about when it will be reopened?
James, can I answer your first question to Carlos before I go on to the cadastre?
Please do, yes.
And I agree totally with Carlos. I didn't think he was going to leave me any room to put in an answer, but I am going to say one thing. For us at SolGold and with the Alpala deposit, time is of the essence, because we're squeezed with time. We're squeezed with study time. We're squeezed with financial time. We've squeezed from the government point of view because we know that the government term is 4 years and we want to make great progress during that time. And the thing that's slowing us down a lot is the timely granting of the permits, the water licenses, exploration licenses, and the mining and construction licenses. And I'm not saying that we want them to be done rashly or without consideration. But the news that this government has issued more in the first month than the previous regime is certainly welcome from our point of view. Moving on to the cadastre, it's quite strange for SolGold, because when the cadastre was opened previously, we actually gained almost 70 different concessions around Ecuador. And when we're in the process now of looking at our concessions and actually rationalizing our land holding. So we're talking to various partners, various other mining groups about partnering with us on our concessions. So the cadastre being closed is actually helping SolGold rationalize its situation. What the cadastre being closed for Ecuador means is that the outside investors, outside mining companies that want to come into Ecuador don't have any land to look for themselves. They've got to look to a partner with us. And I think, I don't know much about the cadastre, but I would imagine that they're looking at their system that they've got in Ecuador, and they're hoping that they can move it forward into a more IT friendly, more digital friendly situation. So when they do open the doors of the cadastre, everything works a little bit more efficiently than it did before, when I imagine most of it was done with on paper and a lot of documentation.
Thank you, Keith, for both of those answers. Daniel, I just want to ask you something, because you're based in Guayaquil. Now, something I know Ecuador quite well, because I actually spent the pandemic in Ecuador. My wife is Ecuadorian, so that's given me some insight to the culture. And one of the most amazing things I find about Ecuador is how kind of regionalist it is. You know, there's a real difference. You've kind of got a Quito-focused economy, you've got a coastal economy, and I know obviously you've got the jungle and the Galapagos as well. But as a small way of showing that, a small way it manifests itself, it's one of the only Latin American countries I've been to that actually has 2 British chambers of commerce. You have a British Chamber of Commerce in Quito, and you have one in Guayaquil. I just want to ask you something, Daniel, because you're based in Guayaquil. Traditionally, oil and gas, okay, so it takes place in the Amazon, but the companies doing it are normally headquartered in Quito, presumably because they want to be close to the legislators and the political decisions. Mining is largely on the slopes of the Amazon. I'm sorry, on the slopes of the Andes, obviously. But of course, all of that mining produce has to come in and out of the ports. I just want to ask you, do you think that mining, whereas oil and gas tends to be quite a regional industry, taking place in the Amazon and headquartered in Quito, do you think that mining will be a generally national industry?
Well, first of all, as you're familiar with Ecuador, Ecuador has, although this very diverse situation, is also a very small country. That makes it very easy to move around Ecuador without much problem, with not much time. Quito and Guayaquil are connected in flights that take you back and forth in flights that last less than 40 minutes. So it's a small country in itself. Historically, oil was discovered in the coast, but the larger oil fields in the 70s were discovered in the Amazon, and therefore handled and in the northern part of the Amazon, and therefore it was easier to control that those routes, even the oil fields, through the northern part of Ecuador that take you to the ports in the northern part of Ecuador, in Esmeraldas. The mining activities that take place in the highlands, you could say that you see a diverse behavior in the communities towards mining activities if they are in the central to northern part of Ecuador, whereas they occur in the central to southern part of Ecuador. There are different types of organizations, communities-wise talking, that make up for these differences. And you see that historically the lower part, the southern part of Ecuador has had a different type of development in the smaller scale mining. I think that because of the significant output that I agree with the minister, Ecuador is going to face in the next 10 years, and hopefully even larger if smaller and medium scale projects are included, we will see that a lot of that product will have to, all of that product will have to be shipped towards the ports. And that poses an enormous opportunity for Guayaquil and the ports that have been developed nearby, Pozorja, and all the infrastructure, the rail infrastructure that the minister was talking, railroad infrastructure the minister was talking about. So I think that will create warehouses and deposit houses near the coastal region. So I think that mining activities will although national, will create more of activity in the coastal region that oil activity has traditionally meant for the zones, for the coastal zone.
Excellent, thank you, Daniel. And I think this is a good time to close the panel and close the event, close this conference.